The slap echoed down the corridor. Then came the silence, and that was louder. LaMonica McIver didn't flinch. She shoved the Homeland Security officer hard, bare-palmed, full force, and walked off without so much as a backward glance. The clipboard hit the floor. The officer didn't react, but the security cameras caught everything. By sundown, the raw footage had landed on Congressman Pat Harrigan's desk. He watched it 17 times, frame by frame, not for doubt, for confirmation. On the monitor, McIver's face froze mid-turn, calm, practiced, as if she'd just swatted away a fly. Behind him, Elise Stefanik leaned on the credenza. She didn't even check if the guy was breathing. Walked off like she owned the damn building. Pat didn't reply. Jim Jordan paced by the window, arms crossed, lips tight. Capitol Police is calling it a hallway disturbance. DHS wrote it up as contact. They're trying to bury it before Judiciary even sees it. Pat clicked pause. She's on the Homeland Security Committee. Jim didn't miss a beat. And that's a Homeland Security officer she just assaulted. Emily Mason, Pat's press director, flipped open a draft release. If you call this out, they'll say it's racially charged. Hakeem's already circling wagons. Ilhan and AOC are lining up to scream victimhood. Pat turned toward the room. Then let them say it, out loud, on C-SPAN, so the country knows who still believes in the law and who just uses it. Jim raised an eyebrow. You want Judiciary to take the lead? No, Pat said. I want my name on it. Committee referral, ethics charge, and floor motion to strip her committee seats. Elise narrowed her eyes. That's going to light the Hill on fire. Then let it burn, he said. Emily hesitated. We've got 72 hours before the floor calendar closes. You miss it, it's gone until next recess. Then we don't miss it, she softened slightly. You want us to leak the footage? Number, I'll play it myself. On the record. Jim stopped pacing. You know what happens after that. The squad will spin it. MSNBC will run it on loop. They'll say you're reviving Trump-era politics of vengeance. Good, Pat said. Let them remember what accountability sounds like. He stepped back from the screen. The still frame flickered. Her face looked smug, frozen in assumed impunity. Then he turned away. You ever scrub a name off a war wall? Emily frowned. Excuse me? In Fayetteville, Pat said quietly, we clean the memorial every year. Not with machines, with hands. Cloth, soap, each name by touch. He paused. Last December, someone left a note. Crayon. It said, Dear Grandpa, did you win? He looked at all of them now. If Congress can't answer that with its own integrity, then we didn't win a damn thing. Jim nodded slowly. Elise folded her arms tighter. Emily didn't speak. Pat grabbed his jacket. Elise called out, You sure this is the one? He paused at the door. This isn't the one I chose. It's the one they made. And just like that, he was gone. Behind him, the monitor stayed on. McIver's frozen frame stared back at the room, and in that silence, they all understood. The line had already been crossed. What came next was response. The headlines dropped fast and louder than expected. Harrigan escalates, tensions with ethics motion against McIver. Freshman congressman declares war on the Hill. GOP hardliner risks party divide in unilateral ethics push. By noon, McIver's office had blasted a 6-paragraph statement to every inbox on the Hill. She called it a weaponized stunt, claimed it was a desperate smear from a MAGA holdover, accused Harrigan of trying to erase the voices of women of color through procedural lynching. Within minutes, Joy Reid was reading it live. CNN followed suit by dinnertime. Pat didn't blink. He sat in the Judiciary anteroom, flipping through the sign motion like it was just another Wednesday. Jim Jordan sat opposite, thumbing a Red Bull like it was holy water. You sure about the language? Jim asked. Pat didn't look up. Clear enough? Brutal enough. Just the way I like it. Staffers bustled past outside. On the TV in the corner, McIver was already on MSNBC. Her voice was calm, practiced. This isn't just about me, she told the host. It's about every woman who's ever been talked over, pushed aside, or made to feel unsafe in this institution. Jim muted the TV. You're getting lit up out there. Even Byron's hedging on this. I didn't come here for applause. Emily entered fast, laptop open mid-stride. They're drafting a counter-resolution. Let them, Pat said. Jeffries is privately calling for you to withdraw. Says you're disrupting institutional stability. Pat looked at her. Good. That means they're worried. Emily didn't sit. McIver's team is pushing a narrative that you're retaliating for unrelated investigations. She's implying this is about the classified leaks probe. Pat shook his head. She assaulted a federal officer. That's not narrative. That's statute. Jim raised an eyebrow. You think she'll fold? No. Then what's the goal? Pat glanced up. To remind the rest of them what consequences used to look like. The room went still. From the hallway, noise grew, reporters massing near the judiciary wing, a press scrum forming. Emily checked her phone. They want you on Hannity tonight. You go? Pat shrugged. I didn't pick this fight for ratings. Maybe not, Jim said. But if you don't tell the story, someone else will tell it for you. Pat stood. Outside, flashbulbs popped like war drums. He buttoned his jacket slowly. Then let's give them something worth remembering. Emily led the way, parting the crowd with firm elbows. Jim stayed behind, watching as Pat disappeared into the press pit. Just before he reached the microphones, a reporter shouted above the noise, Congressman Harrigan, are you trying to destroy bipartisanship? He stopped, turned, looked straight into the lens. No, he said calmly. I'm trying to revive accountability. Sorry if that makes some people uncomfortable. Flashes erupted again. Voices barked. McIver's staff, already assembled behind another podium, started throwing elbows for position. Back upstairs, Elise watched the live feed on mute. She didn't smile, just whispered to no one. They're not ready for him. By the time the sun rose over D.C., McIver was already trending. Your stand with LaMonica? Political persecution? White silence violence. CNN called it a calculated attack on a black woman. The Washington Post called it a distraction by an extremist freshman. The View called it misogynistic vigilantism dressed as accountability. What they didn't call it was what it was, assault. Inside a closed-door meeting of the Democratic caucus, Hakeem Jeffries stood at the head of the long table, his knuckles tight on the wood. She's a victim of optics, he said, and we're not going to let MAGA Republicans weaponize ethics to purge dissent. Ilhan Omar nodded sharply. They're trying to make her the face of lawlessness. We won't let them. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez leaned forward, voice precise. If they want a floor fight, let's give them one. But we turn this into a referendum on race, not rules. In the hallway outside, the cameras waited. So did the script. LaMonica McIver emerged 10 minutes later, flanked by 3 aides and a media handler. Her tone was solemn, but every word had been rehearsed. What happened last week was regrettable. I never meant to cause harm. But let's be clear. What's happening now is bigger than one moment in a hallway. This is about who gets to make mistakes and who gets crucified. The headlines were waiting before the mics went cold. McIver, they want to destroy my voice. Dems rally behind accused Congresswoman. GOP ethics push sparks accusations of racial retaliation. Across the aisle, Harrigan sat in a half-lit office with Elise Stefanik, watching the press conference in silence. She didn't even look up. They've flipped the narrative in less than 12 hours. Pat stayed still. They had it ready before I even filed. DOJ's quiet, she added. Too quiet. They won't move until someone bleeds. A moment passed. Then Jim Jordan entered without knocking, phone in hand. We've got trouble, he said. Committee counsel just informed us that the Democratic members are walking out of tomorrow's ethics hearing unless you withdraw the referral. Pat didn't blink. Then let them walk. Jim tossed the phone onto the desk. You're not listening. If they boycott, the committee stalls. The referral dies in limbo. So be it. Elise turned to him. You came here to fight? Fine. But if you let this turn into a partisan cage match, you'll lose the point, and the country will forget what started it. Pat stood up, walked to the window. Outside, protesters had already gathered, signs calling him racist, fascist, worse. They forgot what law looks like a long time ago, he said. I'm just putting a face on the reminder. Jim paced. You need air cover. DeSantis isn't saying anything. Trump's team is watching but staying quiet. You want this to stick, you better get support fast. Pat didn't respond. His mind was somewhere else. Finally, he spoke. They're not just defending her. They're defending the idea that consequences are optional, as long as the politics align. He turned. And I intend to prove them wrong, even if I do it alone. Inside the cloakroom, it was quiet enough to hear shoes creak on the floor. Pat stood alone at the edge of the marble fireplace, flipping through a folder of legal precedent and procedural history. Across the room, Majority Whip Steve Scalise stood stiff, arms crossed, waiting for the storm to land. You've got 5 committee chairs pressing for you to walk this back, Scalise said. They're saying it's not worth the heat. Pat didn't look up. What's worth it then? The seat? The silence? Scalise sighed. You're turning the spotlight on the party at the worst time. We've got a budget fight looming, border votes stacking up, and now every headline's about you versus McIver. I didn't throw the punch, Pat replied. I just pressed play. Jim Jordan entered mid-sentence. You're losing moderates by the hour. Fitzpatrick just called this unnecessary escalation. Bacon's staff says they want a distance. McCarthy won't say a word. Pat flipped the page. Elise leaned in from a side chair. They're not abandoning you because you're wrong. They're abandoning you because you're right, and that scares the hell out of them. Scalise stepped forward. We're trying to hold the majority, Pat. You blow this into a party-wide purity test, we lose independence. We lose swing districts. Then maybe we don't deserve to hold the majority, Pat said. That landed like a punch. Jim leaned against the wall. You ever consider that maybe justice isn't the best messaging strategy in an election year? Pat looked at him. You ever consider that maybe it's the only one that's worth a damn? Aide knocked. Sir, press is waiting. Outside, a crowd had swelled on the Capitol steps. Reporters shouted, staffers texted. McIver had just left MSNBC and was now being trailed by Vice News. She looked unbothered, heroic even. She waved to cameras like a senator. Pat stepped behind the podium, face unreadable. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't smile. He opened the folder and began. Last week, a sitting member of Congress put her hands on a federal officer. That is not alleged. It is not disputed. It is not unclear. The flashes began. Cameras locked in. But Pat's tone didn't change. And today, the same Congress that writes our laws is considering whether one of its own should be held to them. I want you to think about that. He glanced over the crowd, eyes steady. If a Capitol police officer had laid a hand on her, they'd be fired. If a protester had done the same, they'd be in jail. But when power assaults power, Washington calls it politics. He let the words hang. I didn't come here to play pretend. I didn't run for this seat to rubber stamp double standards. If you think consequences should apply based on party, popularity, or skin color, then you don't believe in justice. You believe in caste. The air thickened. He closed the folder. You want to censure me? Do it. You want to primary me? Try it. But I won't be part of a Congress that fears the truth more than it fears corruption. The last line cut clean, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then the questions started flying. Congressman, do you regret escalating the situation? Is this about ethics or revenge? Are you coordinating with Trump's legal team? Pat didn't answer. He stepped away from the podium. Behind the crowd in the shadow of the Capitol, Elise whispered to Jim, just loud enough to be heard. He just rewrote the battlefield. Jim didn't argue. He just muttered, now let's see who's willing to bleed on it. The clip of Pat's floor speech went viral within the hour. Not on MSNBC, not on CNN, but on X, on Rumble, on threads of threads. The speech that broke the chamber. Pat Harrigan, the only one left with a spine. If this man isn't right, then nothing in D.C. is. But inside the Capitol, things were shifting. In the GOP conference room, Kevin McCarthy slammed the door behind him. This isn't sustainable, he said. You lit a fuse under a powder keg and walked away like it wasn't your problem. Elise Stefanik didn't flinch. You mean accountability? I mean losing suburban voters, Kevin snapped. Jim Jordan leaned forward. He's not losing voters. He's gaining believers. Every email we've seen since the speech? Firestorm. In his favor, McCarthy scoffed. The base doesn't win elections by itself. Pat stepped into the room, still holding the worn leather folder. I'm not here to win their comfort, he said. I'm here to force a choice. Silence, then Kevin crossed his arms. You want to play martyr? Fine, but don't drag the whole caucus onto your cross. Pat looked straight at him. I'm not dragging them anywhere. I'm just asking who still remembers why we came here. Before McCarthy could reply, a knock. Emily opened the door. Her voice was low, uncertain. There's someone you need to meet. Standing just outside in DHS uniform was Officer Miguel Alvarez, mid-40s, stone still. Dignity burned into posture. I was the one she hit, he said. The room froze. I filed my report. It was changed. Words softened. Video clipped. They told me it would disappear quietly. No one spoke. I've served 3 administrations, Alvarez continued. Never spoke out once. But when I saw your speech, sir, I realized silence doesn't protect the badge. It just buries it. He held out a small flash drive. Here's the unedited footage and a copy of the original report. Jim took it. Elise looked stunned. Kevin was pale. Pat didn't even blink. Thank you, he said. Alvarez nodded, then added, but you should know. My supervisor's already been reassigned. They're coming for me next. Pat's eyes narrowed. Then they'll have to come through all of us. Elise stepped forward. We leak this? Pat shook his head. Number? We do what they're too afraid to do. We stand behind it. Fully, publicly. By name, Jim's voice was low. This isn't just about McIver anymore. Pat nodded. It never was. And as they watched the footage, raw, uncut, indisputable, a grim calm filled the room. They had crossed the threshold. What came next couldn't be undone. Everyone in the chamber knew what was coming. They just didn't know how loud it would land. Pat Harrigan entered through the center aisle, alone. No staff, no binder. Just a flash drive in his coat pocket and a pair of eyes that hadn't blinked since the night before. LaMonica McIver was already seated across the aisle, flanked by her inner circle. Her posture was perfect, her expression unreadable. 9:58 a.m. The speaker banged the gavel. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized. Pat walked to the podium, but before he could speak, McIver rose. Point of personal privilege, Mr. Speaker. Pat turned to her, slow, controlled. The speaker hesitated, then nodded. McIver stepped forward, calm and practiced. Before my colleague continues, I'd like to remind the body that personal grievances, however theatrically presented, do not override process or dignity. She turned toward Pat with a smile that could cut marble. And that playing judge, jury, and executioner on the House floor doesn't make you brave. It makes you desperate. The room murmured. Pat didn't flinch. You're worried about process? He said. You shoved a federal officer and walked away without consequences. That's your version, she snapped. And it's not the whole story. He stepped forward, voice low but cutting. Number. It's the part you can't erase. The part on tape. McIver folded her arms. And what do you get from this? A clip for Fox News? A campaign email? Or just the satisfaction of targeting another black woman who won't bow to your outrage cosplay? The chamber erupted. Some cheers, some boos, mostly chaos. The speaker slammed the gavel again. Order! Pat let it hang, then looked directly at McIver. I didn't come here to take a knee. I came here to remind this chamber that we're either ruled by laws or ruled by those who outlast headlines. He turned to the clerk and nodded. The monitor came to life. Raw footage. No edits. McIver's hand hitting the officer's chest. The radio clattering to the floor. Her face. Her stride. Her silence. Gasps. Silence. Pat turned back to the floor. We all saw it. No spin. No filter. Just what happened. He scanned the room. If a cop had done that to her, they'd be gone. If a protester had done it to any of us, they'd be in cuffs. He looked at McIver. But because you sit in this chamber, You thought you could walk through accountability like it was just another press hit. She opened her mouth. He cut her off. I don't need your statement. I need this body to remember what a line looks like and what happens when it gets crossed. He stepped away from the podium. McIver's voice rang out behind him. You think you've won something? This place doesn't run on tape. It runs on numbers. And last I checked, you're still just one. Pat turned halfway. Just enough. One is all it takes to tell the truth. He walked off, and behind him the chamber sat stunned, watching the frozen image of McIver's hand mid-strike, still paused on the giant screen. The gavel dropped once, twice, 3 times, but order wasn't coming back. Not today. They had underestimated him, and now they were running out of exits. Inside the Capitol, the fallout from Pat Harrigan's speech and the footage release was moving faster than any whip count could track. In the Democratic cloakroom, the energy was pure crisis. Hakeem Jeffries stood over the table, voice low but shaking with control. The story's spreading outside the Beltway. It's not just Fox anymore. A P picked it up. Reuters is asking for comment. Ilhan Omar scrolled through her phone. They're framing it as evidence-driven accountability. That's not just narrative loss. That's moral framing. And we're on the wrong side of it. AOC tossed her notepad aside. Then flip it. Flip the morality. Paint Harrigan as reckless. Say he bypassed process. Say he endangered congressional order. Jeffries didn't flinch. That only works if DOJ sits still. If they move, our defense collapses. Then an aide entered, whispering in Jeffries' ear. He paled. What? The aide repeated it, louder this time. The Justice Department has just announced an official inquiry into Representative McIver's conduct, citing the new video evidence submitted to the House Oversight Archive. No one spoke. Across the aisle, the Republican conference was locked down. McCarthy stared at the television screen where Attorney General Merrick Garland's spokesperson was mid-sentence. Veronica reviewing the full footage and officer testimony, potential charges under Title 18, United States Code, Section 111, regarding assault on a federal officer, are now formally under consideration. Steve Scalise slammed his folder shut. You just forced DOJ's hand, Pat. That's not just a win, that's historic. Jim Jordan was pacing. And now we've got momentum. Do we press it? Elise Stefanik looked at Pat. Your call. We've broken through the firewall. You want to go all the way? Pat leaned on the desk, composed but burning from within. We can't stop halfway. Not after everything they tried to hide. Scally stepped forward. This sets a precedent. You're asking us to criminally refer a sitting congresswoman. You sure that's what this moment demands? Pat looked him straight in the eye. No, he said. That's what justice demands. Across the building, McIver's office was under siege. She stood in the center, flanked by lawyers and press aides. One of them whispered, You should get ahead of it. Go on CNN. Frame yourself as the victim of a political machine. Say they're turning one mistake into a crusade. McIver didn't speak. Another aide checked her phone. Reporters are calling the incident undeniable. The press wants a statement by tonight. Still, McIver said nothing, because deep down she knew what was coming. Back in the chamber, Pat drafted the formal motion of referral. The language was surgical, no theatrics, just facts. In light of conclusive visual and testimonial evidence, and in accordance with the House's duty to uphold the rule of law equally among its members, we refer the matter of Representative LaMonica McIver to the United States Department of Justice for further investigation and potential prosecution. Jim Jordan read it over his shoulder. This will tear the floor in half. Elise nodded. Then maybe it's time to see which half believes in the law. Pat didn't say a word. He handed the motion to the clerk. The chamber bells began to ring. It didn't happen with a bang. It happened with a roll call. At exactly 5:02 p.m., the clerk of the House began reading aloud. Resolution 723, motion to refer Representative LaMonica McIver to the Department of Justice for investigation and potential prosecution. The floor was full, every seat taken. No hallway games, no coffee runs, no procedural delays. The air was brittle. One breath too deep and the chamber might shatter. Pat Harrigan stood beside the well, motion in hand. The gallery above was silent. The press pens, packed. The world was watching. Across from him, McIver sat stone still, her arms crossed, her face blank. Not defiant, not fearful, just resigned. Elise whispered behind him. You ready? Pat nodded once. Been ready since they said silence was safer. The speaker called him forward. He approached the podium. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Unapologetic. His voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. We've heard the arguments, we've seen the footage, we've read the reports. What happens now is not vengeance, it's integrity. He scanned the room. This chamber does not get to choose which laws it respects based on who's breaking them. Either the law matters, or this building is just a stage set. Across the aisle, McIver finally rose. I have the right to respond, she said. The speaker allowed it. She stepped forward, heels clicking like metronome ticks on marble. I've been called a lot of things in this body, she began. But today I'm called a threat. Not because of what I did, but because of who I am. Because I dare to be loud. I dare to resist. She turned toward Pat. You think this is about the law? It's not. It's about fear. About keeping people like me quiet. Pat didn't move. When she returned to her seat, he stepped forward again. You said this is about fear, he said. You're right. It's about a country afraid of what happens when accountability applies to the powerful. He paused. And today we decide if we're brave enough to face it. The vote began. Name by name. Voice by voice. Some votes were loud. Some were whispered. Some were almost apologetic. But they kept coming. And when the clerk announced the total, the chamber held its breath. Resolution passes. No cheers. No gavel slam. Just silence. Like something heavy had shifted. Across the room, McIver stood slowly, hands trembling slightly. She didn't speak. She didn't look at Pat. She just walked out. As the doors closed behind her, Elise leaned in. No side really won. Pat nodded. Number. But for the first time in a long time, someone had to answer. He looked back at the chamber, fractured, shaken, exposed. And he didn't feel triumphant. He felt something colder, like the beginning of something harder, because this wasn't the end. It was just the first time in years that anyone in power had been forced to say the quiet part out loud, that no one is above the law.